You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 159. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead with courage. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
On the last episode of 2020, we mentioned that each month during 2021, there would be a focus for the 4 or 5 podcasts for that month. So welcome to 2021 and welcome to our first monthly focus, and that focus is on purpose. So before Tim and I jump into that conversation, let me remind you that you can find show notes for this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast and look for episode 159. So, Tim, let's talk about purpose. To get us started, Tim, can you tell us your perspective on this question? Why is knowing your purpose an important part of being a courageous leader?
Well, my leadership is, the way I would look at it is my leadership is rooted in who I am. So at any given time, I'm going to say that my purpose in life is to be who God created me to be, and that I find that in Jesus Christ. So everything I do then is rooted in being who God created me to be, whether it's a husband, father, pastor, podcaster, whatever it is, it's rooted in that purpose. And so as I make decisions in my life, it grows out of that purpose. And so as I give leadership, it's not as much as I would want it to be about my preferences and what I like and dislike. I've got to see the bigger picture out of why God created me to make those decisions.
So the line that, it's not just a line, let me reframe that, but it is a line that you will hear us say over and over and over again. And part of why I appreciate this sentence is because of the depth and the meaning that is behind it. And Tim, you just pointed to it. Who you are is how you lead. And so understanding your purpose is intricately tied to who you are. And so to understand your purpose, first, you need to understand who you are. And once you understand that, that will determine how you lead. And so that, everything that Tim said and what I just added is why we are starting with purpose. And so each month as we introduce a new theme, Tim and I will have a conversation like this, and then for the remainder of the month, we'll have conversations with different leaders. And sometimes we might have conversations, just the two of us. We'll just see how 2021 unfolds. So the other thing that Tim and I talked about in terms of understanding your purpose and why that's an important part of being a courageous leader is, if I can say it this way, think about it in terms of a funnel or something that helps you sort things out. When you understand your purpose, you're naming what your why is. And when you name your why and know what your purpose is, you don't even attempt to be all things to all people because you know what you're focused on. And you stay in your lane and you stay focused on that purpose. This is a ridiculous example, but it'll illustrate the point. As we start 2021 and as we ended 2020, one of the things that was happening in the world was a COVID vaccine was starting to be distributed. Tim and I are not research scientists who go about investigating a vaccine and developing a vaccine, and we're not supply chain managers who then figure out how to get that vaccine to different parts of the country and around the world. So we're not focused on making the vaccine happen. Yes, it's a part of our world, and it will be a part of your world too, but it's not where our focus is. So Tim and I won't be doing a podcast about the COVID-19 vaccine. Okay? Silly example, but it's a part of our culture right now. It's a part of what is happening, but we're going to stay focused in our lane. And at the very same time, let's take another, I'm jumping back to 2020. Sorry, folks. The efforts and the challenges around racial unrest in this country are integrally tied to who we are and how we lead. So while some people thought that that was not an issue that religious leaders should be speaking about, it is an issue for the church, and it is also an issue for courageous leaders to address, because it is something that is dividing society and not uniting society. And that's part of, at least I won't speak for you, Tim, that's a part of who I am. And so there's two contrasting things that we won't address and we have addressed and will likely continue to address, and the reasons behind them, because it connects to our why. They connect to our purpose. And so when it comes to decision making, when you understand your purpose, it's much easier to make those decisions about yes or no, we will or we won't, when there's clarity around your purpose.
So, Sarah, I can't make what you said better, but I'll add this to it, and that is, when we understand our purpose or our why, I'm gonna say it this way: we're not blowing in the wind, and we're not trying to be pleasing to all people. For us to be who God created us to be may sometimes put us in conflict with people. That doesn't mean that you have to run from it. It means that's a place that you step out courageously, become vulnerable, and wrestle with that vulnerability, so that you can get to the place where we can all be who God created us to be, and that's part of the purpose.
And that conflict that you pointed to, I may have said this at another time, it's just become increasingly a part of what I feel a need to say and point out. Conflict has been framed as a negative thing in our lives and culture, a destructive thing, a hurtful thing. Conflict can be very creative and very life-giving, because at the core of what conflict is it's about differences. And so recognizing what those differences are, a different point of view, different perspective, different life experiences, whatever it may be, can help you to get to a new place. But in the context of this conversation, when conflict is happening around your purpose, you have a core challenge within the organization that you are leading. Whether that organization is your family, whether that organization is a church, whether that organization is a nonprofit, a small business, a team in your workplace, whatever it may be, if there is conflict around the purpose, I would say, and I would advise you to back up and have that conversation and help everybody get on the same page, because the conflict that you will have going forward is going to be a direct result of lack of clarity around your purpose. And I would say the conflict that is divisive in our churches, it often stems from that. If we continue to peel back the onion and get to the core of what it's about, at the core of what is happening is it is a different perspective on what the purpose of the church is. For some folks, it's all about the social interaction with a veneer of discipleship on it. Now, you can say, did Sarah just really say that? Yes, I did. For others, It's about being a follower of Jesus and equipping others to transform the world. Those are two very different purposes in the local church. One, I would say, is church. One, I would say, is a club.
So what we're talking about then is having clarity of purpose. And even though there may be, with individuals, may look at purpose in different ways, the mission of any organization is where those multi-purposes come together to lead the mission. So in a way, not everybody has to have the same purpose, but using their purpose to reach the mission or to accomplish the mission. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Let me back up. What I was referring to is an organizational purpose. Individually, yes, you may have a purpose that you express differently than any organization that you participate in. I mean, how many different educational institutions have you and I been a part of, Tim? Each one of those organizations had a very clear purpose. The part of that organization that I engaged in, that you engaged in, that our classmates engaged in, was related to the overall mission and purpose of that educational institution. But that specific school, college, department had an even more focused purpose. And so in any organization, what I would say is, how is your individual role related to that organizational purpose? And if you are a person of integrity, I would continue to say, how does your individual purpose relate to that overall organizational purpose? As individuals participating in an organization, we don't get to choose the purpose. And unless you are a solo person working independently as an entrepreneur, you don't have that privilege. We're a part of something bigger than ourselves. We don't have that privilege to be able to say, well, here's what our organizational purpose is. The only thing that you can do is say, here is how I understand my purpose and how I relate to the purpose that has been named for the organization. So yes, individual purposes may be different and may be expressed differently, but as people of integrity, I would say you have to pause and ask yourself, how does your purpose relate to the organizational purpose? And if it doesn't, I would continue on to say, then why are you a part of that organization?
I think you just went the direction I was thinking. So, Sarah, I appreciate what you've just said. So what are some ways purpose becomes important to courageous leaders as we're talking about it now?
Well, I think one of the things that we named in terms of learning around 2020 was adaptability. And I don't know about you, Tim, but I don't think that that's going to change come 2021, that we're going to continue to need to adapt. And so if we're going to continue to need to adapt, staying focused on your purpose while you're pivoting and learning to do things in different ways is going to be an essential skill that people learn. And without that clarity of purpose, how have you said it? Blowing in the wind?
I agree with you, and I think part of this for me is that the adaptability didn't come about just because we have a pandemic or we've had racial unrest. Adaptability is just part of courageous leadership,
right?
Regardless of the situation. And so knowing your purpose allows you to adapt in whatever context or situation, circumstance you find yourself.
And isn't adaptability also a part of growth?
Well, if you're looking for an answer, yes.
Here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking about what high school looked like when I was in high school, what high school looked like when you were in high school, and what high school looks like today are very different things. And yet they're all high school. It's all an educational system. There's good, there's bad, there's ugly for all three of those experiences. But there was adaptation that happened because sometimes it was because of new technology became available, new resourcing. As we innovate in the world and as we see needs around us. For example, I didn't have a whole lot of group work in high school. And yet, is there a high school around that doesn't have a group project? You see what I'm getting at? That's an adaptation. And so as courageous leaders, maybe another way to say it is staying nimble. The image that comes to mind is when I played tennis, my coach would often say to us, get on your toes, get on your toes. You had to be nimble and ready for whatever was coming at you. And yet I always knew what I needed to do. The intention, as simple as this is going to sound, was always to get the ball over the net so that your opponent had to hit it and hit it back to you. And they either made a mistake or they hit it back and the game went on. And so that adaptability, while staying focused on our purpose, gives us the opportunity to be nimble. And I think that maybe what I want to say and what I'm trying to say is to contrast it with being rigid. When people have a clear purpose and aren't adaptable, they're not courageous because they're rigid.
So one of the things that I would say about adaptability that I've learned over this last year, that's not going to change. It may continue to evolve into something else, but is digital design. You mentioned high school. I went back a long time ago, and in fact, I think I was out of high school before you were born. There was no digital design when I was in high school.
Right.
And I've got granddaughters who are studying those things now.
Right.
But yet, at times, there are organizations like the church that have difficulty stepping in to those kinds of changes because it's just not the way we've done it. And it's the idea of purpose brings us to a place of learning those things.
So I want you to rewind and say that statement again that makes me sigh. You know the one. That's just not the way.
It's just not the way we've done it before.
There is nothing about that statement that is courageous. Period. End of story. Not budging, not negotiating, not being adaptable on that one. and I'm being a bit dramatic about that because we use that as an excuse. We haven't done things that way before. It may be an acknowledgement of what people are feeling. Okay, you're right. We haven't done it that way before. But what could happen if we try? What is possible if we do this in a different way? What does having this technology make possible in the future that we haven't even dreamt of? And yet now we have the opportunity to do so. So if you want to be a courageous leader and live into your purpose, and you hear that statement, what I'm going to say to you is recognize that it is not aligned with courageous leadership. Recognize the feelings behind that and acknowledge the emotion in that, and then invite people on a different journey. Both can happen. And we didn't talk about this in our year-end wrap-up, but I think another one of my learnings, and that I would put into the context of purpose and adaptability, The both and thinking. The polarization of it's either this or that is often not the way the world works. There's a whole lot of gray in there, and there's a whole lot of variation between one extreme and another. And the more adept that we get at recognizing those nuances, the better we're going to be able to adapt and recognize, I'll call it an excuse statement like, well, we've not done things that way before, or whining, or whatever you want to name that as. Loss, grief. I mean, I could put that statement under a lot of different categories. And so I think for me, the both and the recognizing that there is, on a Likert scale, it might be from 1 to 5. But from 1 to 5, there's also 1.1, there's 1.2, there's 1.3, there's 1.4, there's 1.5. You get my point. And that happens all the way up to 5. There's a lot of nuances there. And if we're going to be adaptable and stay focused on our purpose, we've got to skill up in that and being able to see how to hold two different things in tension and see the nuances. That's all I wanted to say. That was a long, twisted route to get to the point of saying, learning how to be skilled and holding two things in tension so that we can become more adaptable is a skill that we need.
Sarah, would you say that one of the ways purpose becomes important to courageous leaders is that in the midst of anxiety or fear, that courageous leaders step toward that and step into it because they understand their purpose, so they're not going to back down even when they feel uncertain, because they do know what they're doing is important. And it, instead of it paralyzing them, it kind of mobilizes them. Is that a way to say it?
Yeah, I would say courageous leaders expect to be afraid and recognize that fear and what it means and don't get wrapped up in it. They know that that's a part of their leadership.
So to be a courageous leader then not only means that you're going to adapt to different contexts and situations and circumstances, but even in the midst of adapting, you expect anxiety and fear. I mean, that's just maybe I could say it this way. It's just part of change. It's part of growth. It's being places that are different, and you don't have to be afraid of different. It's at a place where there are points of view that are different than yours, and you don't have to be afraid of different points of view. They're just different. That's not the problem.
Yeah, I think when I think about courage and fear and purpose, there's something that when you're feeling fear and focused on your purpose, you know it's going to be okay. It also might be hard. And so you're going to keep going, and you're going to take the steps, and you're going to fall on your face, and you're going to learn to get back up and go, oops, I screwed that one up. And when you screw it up, doing it again, anytime we've messed something up, the next time we go to do it, there's always a little element of fear because you're thinking, oh gosh, am I going to screw this up again? And what do? Courageous leaders do it again, and they don't let them hold them back. And so for courageous leaders to stay focused on their purpose, I don't mean to make light of it, but expect that fear is going to be a part of it. Expect you're going to get the butterflies in your stomach. Expect you're going to have those thoughts of, oh crap. We all experience fear in a different way. This isn't fear running into a burning building to save someone fear. Let me clarify there. This is that unsettled feeling of, oh crap, I'm not sure I want to. And yet you continue to do so anyway.
One of the places that some of the people that we work with experience fear is in resistance to moving forward or doing things differently. And so that works. That's exactly how it works with what you just said, is that you're going to expect to have resistance.
Right.
And it's not going to be a good feeling. But this isn't based on feeling, it's based on your purpose.
Right. The last thing that we wanted to remind you about staying focused on your purpose and how purpose is an essential attribute of being a courageous leader. And this one may sound counterintuitive, but it's around the big idea of rest. And Tim, you want to name that one for us?
Well, when I think of this in terms of courageous leaders recognizing to stay focused on the purpose, they need a time for reflection, and they need a time of being able to think clearly. And I think when it goes counterintuitive to me is that we think great leaders are always on and they're always working hard and they overwork, they do everything for everybody else. They add everything to their lives. The old saying is, if you want something done, get somebody busy to do it. But courageous leaders know boundaries. Courageous leaders know where they need to set the parameters of their own lives so that they can be replenished in different ways. So that's part of what I think of when we talk about rest. To stay focused on the purpose, you can't be so worn out that you say, well, I'm just going to give up on this one. You got to be able to be clear and healthy and forward looking.
Yeah, I think the other piece of this one for me, as I think about courageous leaders staying focused on their purpose, is building in and recognizing the need for individual and collective pause is the only way that you're going to maintain courage. Because without that rest, you can't face fears when you're exhausted. Because what happens when you're exhausted and you're facing something that you are afraid of? You become a crab. I'll say it that way. You're not a nice person. That's another way to say it. Because you're tired. You also said it, Tim. You're also not thinking clearly. And so you're not going to be able to be adaptable because you're not going to see the possibilities around you. And why I said it sounds counterintuitive is we think that everything stops around us. But the reality is when we stop and when we pause, it gives all of the systems a chance to reset and reboot. And courageous leaders need that. And so if you didn't get rest between Christmas and New Year's, I hope that you're starting the new year with rest, because we've got a long year ahead of us. And if we're going to maintain a focus on courageous leadership and be equipped to do that, I think of the four basic skills of courageous leadership: rumbling with vulnerability, trust, living into your values, and learning to rise. If you are not caring for your own soul and resting, none of those things are possible. I can't think of a way that someone who is exhausted can be courageous.
And another way that I'm thinking of it is, and I think we mentioned this on an earlier podcast, and that is the rhythms that we put together last year, even for LeaderCast. We took a time to pause in the summer to do something a little differently.
Right.
so that we could breathe deeply and plan for the next season of LeaderCast. And it's the same for individuals. There's a time to stop and whether you're intentionally reflecting or not, there comes a time where you reflect on where you've been and where you're going and what you need to do to get there. And that's part of what rest is about.
Yeah. Hearing you say that, I was listening to a podcast, and if I can remember which podcast it was, I will link to it. But they were talking about the question that they asked, and this is the question I'm going to leave folks with before Tim offers his final thoughts, is what are your monthly and weekly resets that need to happen so that you can stay focused on your purpose? And so for me, each week I'm looking not only at what is on my calendar, but where are we going and what are we trying to accomplish? What is coming up that I need to be prepared for right now and working on right now so that I'll be ready when that happens, even if there's a pivot in the middle of it. And how does that fit into the bigger picture of the entire year of where things are going and our overall purpose? And so for me, that looks like naming every single week and every single month, here are the 3 big things that I'm going to be focused on. Am I always perfect with that? Absolutely not. So please do not hear me say that. But for you, what are those weekly and monthly resets that have to happen that help you to check in both with your purpose and staying focused on being a courageous leader? Tim, what are your final thoughts?
Sarah, I feel like although we've been on this journey for a while, I think we're ready to start a journey. And I just want to invite people to come along and go with us. Because what we have discovered, I think we knew this already, but I think what we've discovered or have affirmed is that who you are is how you lead. And we want to provide insights and resources for you to be the courageous leader, to be the leader that you were created to be. And the place we want to start is just with ourselves and with that purpose. And I think over these next few weeks, the people that we've interviewed and what people might experience through those interviews will help each of us become more clear on our purpose and how we live that out in leadership.
So the next 3 weeks, you will hear 3 different perspectives and experiences from 3 different leaders in 3 different locations about purpose. And so look for those every Tuesday to drop where you listen to podcasts. And with that, remember that who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.